In this video, we're going to be talking about two very popular bottom fishing rigs, whether you're out deep sea fishing or you may be inshore fishing in water that's a little bit deeper or that has, stronger current, or you need to keep your bait down on the bottom. And those two rigs are going to be, number one, the fish finder rig, and then number two is a knocker rig. Those are my two favorite rigs to use, and what I want to talk about specifically are the pros and cons of each one and which one you should be using depending on the conditions and the type of fishing that you're doing. So to show you the two rigs here, this is the fish finder rig. You're going to have your hook, you're going to have a section of leader here, and then you're going to have your swivel, and then on your main line you're going to have your sinker. So your sinker is going to be above the swivel attached to your main line. Now some people like to use a bead where your sinker is going to meet the swivel just to sort of save the knot. But what I've found is that I don't like to use any extra, what I like to call jewelry on my rigs. So what I do is I look for sinkers that are pretty high quality. These steel sinkers made by Eagle Claw, they work really well because on the openings, they're not very sharp and jagged like some of these lead sinkers can be. And if you do have a lead sinker, what I highly suggest doing is using a small file and just filing down any sharp edges that may be on the openings of the sinkers to help save your line and save your knots. Now, as far as a knocker rig goes, the only real difference is where the sinker is at, your egg sinker. And with the knocker rig, the egg sinker is actually on your leader and it goes all the way down to your hook, as opposed to having a swivel on the end and then having your egg sinker above the swivel. So that's the only real difference as far as the rigging goes. Now, as far as the two main advantages of the knocker rig that I really like about it is, number one, with that egg sinker, being able to go down to the hook. If you do get hung up on structure, all you have to do is let out some slack, let that egg sinker settle down to the bottom, and then pull it up really tight, and that's going to allow that egg sinker to come up to your line and then slide down and basically knock your hook free of whatever it may be snagged on. Also, it's much more compact if you're trying to cast, so you won't get tangled up as much, because when you go to cast, that egg sinker is going to slide down to your hook where your bait's at, and it's all nice and compact, so when you cast you don't have any line twists or anything like that. Now, the only real disadvantage I found when using the knocker rig, especially if you're fishing with braided line and you have your line to leader knot or you have a swivel on the end, is that you can't let out as much line as you could with a fish finder rig, because eventually that sinker is going to get to your swivel or it's going to get to your line to leader knot, and it could get stuck on there. And if you have a swivel, obviously that weight's going to stop, and then your bait is as far out as it can go. And that's when I like to use the fish finder rig. If I'm fishing in stronger current and I want to allow my bait to, go out as far as I want it to, that's when I like to use a fish finder rig. And that's pretty much where the name comes from. You let your bait get down to the bottom, sinker sits on the bottom, and then your bait's out here, and then you can just open your bail and let line out. Let that bait go out with the current, or let that bait swim naturally as it would, and you can let it swim out, as opposed to using a knocker rig and your bait is pretty much, stuck in a certain area. And then one of the biggest, downfalls that I've seen when using the fish finder rig is casting. It's really tough to cast because as you cast it out, your sinker is way out here and then your bait is way out here. When you go to cast it, you may experience some line twist, your bait starts spinning in the air, hits the water, and also as it's sinking, you can experience the same thing with line twist. As that thing is sinking down, this line is twisting around. If your bait especially isn't rigged properly, your line is going to start twisting around and it's going to come up as a mess. So that's the biggest downfall I found when using the fish finder rig. So just make sure when you are rigging your baits on a fish finder rig, if you're using a live bait, I prefer to hook them in the nose. That way when they're going down to the bottom, they're going down streamline. If you hook them in the tail, their tail is going to catch the current. It's going to cause a lot of resistance as it's going down, and that bait is going to spin and helicopter, and it's going to wrap around your main line. So you want to avoid that. And if using cut bait, same thing, make sure it's streamlined the way you rig it up. If you're using, the tail section of a bait fish, hook it closer to the tail, rip the tail off. That's the more narrow part. That way, as it goes down, it's more streamlined as it's going down, as opposed to hooking it on the opposite side, which is the thicker side. That's going to tend to want to spin as it's going down to the bottom. And same rigging principles if you're using, the knocker rig as well. So to sum it all up, if you're fishing less current or no current, fishing a little bit shallower, and you don't need to let your bait, drift to an area, and you want to be able to cast your bait effectively, I would go with the knocker rig. And again, that's the one where the egg sinker goes all the way down to the hook on your leader. And then if you're fishing an area with a little bit stronger current, you want to keep your bait down on the bottom, be able to let out as much line as you need to let your bait sort of drift down on the bottom with the current, and you don't have to cast too far. I would go with the fish finder rig.
If you are new to Salt Strong, we are the largest online fishing club for saltwater anglers, and we guarantee you two things. Number one, you'll start catching more fish in less time. And number two, you will save a ton of money on your favorite tackle and gear with discounts available exclusively for our members. To learn more, go to saltstrong.com and we'll see you there.
There's something about the water that'll give you peace, all by yourself or with your family. Live Salt Strong and wear the line today.